All right, here's part 2. The flames were small at first, creeping along just one branch. With sudden flames, such as dry bunches of pine needles, caught fire. But in seconds, the flames grew bigger. They leapt and crackled. Black smoke rose in a pillar into the air. The crowd pressed backwards, crushing against each other. The people of Ember, from whom fire was a rare and terrible danger, started upwards with their eyes wide and their mouths gaping. Some of them screamed. Some of them were too frightened to even make a sound. Such a terror came over Lena that she couldn't move, except to stagger a few feet back along the terrible crowd. Her eyes were fixed on the flames, the terrible orange hands reaching up into the branches of the tree. The voices in her mind screamed, "Run, run!" But she couldn't run. Her legs just wouldn't work. It was all they could do just to hold her up. A voice cried out, "Someone's in the tree!" Lena looked up through the smoke just long enough to see the upper branches thrashing and getting a glimpse of something white moving along them. Then she was surrounded again by struggling people. She tripped over a piece of pipe rolling on the pavement and fell into her knees. When she managed to get to her feet again, the mass of people had pressed back behind her, and she found herself near the front of the crowd. On the steps of the town hall, she saw Ben lying motionless, sprawled on his back. Wilmer bent over him, and Mary Waters showered, "Fire truck! Fire truck!" The fire had leapt from the pine up to the town hall. Flames licked up at its wall. That was when Lena heard a wild laugh from behind her. "Let it burn," someone cried. "Let it burn. It's their punishment. They deserve it." She recognized the voice. Who was it? It was Tick. Nasty man. Others took up the cry. "Let it burn," they shouted, and the chorus of voices rose harsh, triumph cheer. The people of Ember were packed together at the far south end of the plaza now, as far from the town hall as the fire as they could get. A few ran into the street to get away, but most of them waited to see what was going to happen. They stayed at a safe distance, hovering between terror and fascination, and watching as the flames streaked up the side of the tower. People of Sparks were running in all directions. Shopkeepers grabbed buckets and ran into the river and filled them with water. But most of the fire was high above their heads, impossible to reach. They flung the water into the air and stood with empty buckets watching the tower burn. The 2 fire trucks arrived, their drivers standing up and lashing the oxen to make them trot. Water sloshed from the big barrels of the trucks' beds. As soon as the truck stopped, people jumped up onto them, grabbing buckets, and began dipping buckets into the water. "Fire line, fire line," they cried. And the villagers came, who must have practiced this many times, formed straggling lines stretched out to the fire from the truck. At the edge of the plaza, burning twigs broke from the pine trees and blew in the wind, and new fire started up there too. People in the fire lines flung water in all directions, but for the few flames each bucket of water doused, it seemed 10 new ones sprang up. Lena's heart was beating so hard it drowned out all her thoughts. She wanted to run, to get away from here, but something paralyzed her. Part of it was fear of the fire. Part was fear of something else. Fear of an idea that was trying to come to the surface of her mind. She didn't want to hear it. "Pay attention," a voice whispered to her, and she tried to push it away. Faster and faster the people on the truck dipped the bucket into the barrels, dipped, filled, and handed the bucket to those in line, who passed along from hand to hand to the people down. The last person in line, the one standing nearest the flames, flung the water, which hissed and steamed and put out a few flames. Tick and his warriors, along the rest of the people of Ember, watched all of this as if it were a frightening but fascinating show. Tick and a few others cheered, but most people gazed goggle-eyed as the flames blackened the town hall. When the wind blew spark towards them, they shrieked and pressed back further. Lena scanned the crowd. Where was Doone? Where was Mrs. Murdo? She didn't see either of them. She could hardly see anything. Smoke filled the air, and all she could see was a shadowy trumph of people. Only the flames were bright. The pine tree was a column of fire within. Lena could see that the tree's black skeleton. When a great branch broke off and fell, crashing into the shrubbery below and setting it all alight, a terrified clamor arose from the people of Umber, and now, instead of pressing backwards, many of them turned and ran. Lena stayed where she was. She felt as if she were being gripped by two huge hands. One pulled her backwards and one away from the fire, back towards the streets of the town, through which she could run to safety. The other pulled her forward into danger, urging her to do what she suddenly knew was right. It was the good thing. It was what she had been waiting for. But she did not want to do it. I can't, she thought. I don't want to. I'm too afraid. Someone else will do it, not me. No, I can't. I think she's going to. I hope you do too. At that moment, the tower collapsed. Its walls crumpled, the roof caved in, and flames shot up from a hole. The flagpole came hurling down like a spear. A blackened wall leaned and toppled. And then the fire was everywhere. Flaming branches and turfs and needles, blown by the wind, landed in dry grass at the edge of the plaza and in the trees by the river, and on the roofs of the market stills. There, cried the people of the buckets, pointing. There, over there. The lines twisted around and the buckets traveled faster, faster, faster from one hand to the other, and those in front of the lines tossed the water this way and that. There were too many fires and not enough people keeping up with them. And now, thought Lena, I have to do it. I will do it. Quickly then, before she changed her mind, she ran. She ran with a hammering heart, with her head down in her hands and fists. She ran as if fighting a powerful wind, out across the plaza by herself, and then she reached the nearest bucket line as she pushed her way in. Traitor! Shrieked a voice behind her. It was Tick's voice. That voice like a cutting blade. Lena heard it, but she paid no attention. Traitor! Traitor! Tick cried again, but his warriors echoed him. Traitor! They yelled, jumped backwards, and the sparks flew too close. Dune got out of the tower just in time. He had to almost throw Torn down the stairs and then take them 3 at a time himself. Torn ran off somewhere as soon as he went out the back door. But Dune ran around towards the plaza, staying close to the market stalls, and joined the crush of Emberites at the south end. Panting, he stared back at the ruins that he had escaped from, the black spine of the tree, the smoldering boards of the town. He watched as the flames consumed the building of the tower, and it collapsed. He saw the fire line snaking among the scattered blaze, and he heard Tick laugh rising among the clatter. Burn, he yelled, burn! And other voices chimed in with him. Let it burn, serves them right. For a moment, Dune stood there, stunned, his mind blank. It seemed that war surged around him, but not the war he had imagined, where he belonged in the battle. Who was his enemy? Where was his friends? Noise and confusion assailed him. His eyes stung, his legs were shaking. And then he saw Lena break away from the crowd and run across the plaza. He heard Tick and his warriors screaming, traitor. And he felt as if it was suddenly in his eyes, and he felt as if suddenly his eyes had opened, though they hadn't been closed, and he had awakened from a bad dream. The air around him seemed to be clear. Strength returned to his legs. He edged between the people in front of him, burst out of the crowd, and ran the same direction as Lena, towards the fire lines. And seeing what Lena and Dune had done, others followed. Clary pushed through the crowd and ran forward, and Mrs. Murdo went right after her, taking long, quick strides and holding up her skirt. Then came the Hoover sisters and Dune's father and fragile Miss Thorne and 5 more people, and 3 after that. They ran with their hands before their mouths or their arms over their heads, shielding themselves from smoke and falling embers. And they added themselves to the bucket brigade and began hauling water. More and more of the people of Ember followed. At last, the only ones not fighting the fire were Tick and a few of his men, wearing half stubborn, half frightened expressions. They clustered at the far end of the plaza, shouting "traitor" now and then, with their useless weapons dangling from their hands. Oh, my goodness. Hang on. We have 2 chapters left. Yes. Okay. The 4th town meeting. That night the wind cleared the smoke from the air. And in the morning the sky was a brilliant blue, and the air felt tingly. The sunlight was warm, but it had a new quality, thinner and sharper. The seasons were changing. A message from town arrived at the hotel that morning. Doon, who happened to be the first person up, ran into the hotel steps. "Tell your people," he said, "that the leader of the Sparks wish to meet the people of Ember at noon today. They will come to the hotel ballroom." Doon conveyed this message to the next several people he saw, and then he told others to tell others, and soon everyone knew. At noon they assembled in the ballroom. Doon stood with his father in the midst of the crowd. All around him he heard uneasy murmurings. Would this be more bad news? He heard Miss Thorne whisper to someone, "I'm so nervous, I have a stomachache." He was nervous too. His hands were damp. At a few minutes after 12, Murray Waters and Wilmer Dent came to the ballroom. With them were four men carrying a stretcher on which Doon saw a blanket-draped figure, a stiff gray beard jutting from the chin of what told him was Ben Barlow. Dr. Hessler walked beside him, and with her was Mrs. Murdo, Lena, and Poppy. Other townspeople followed, lining up around the edge of the room. Doon recognized storekeepers and team leaders, including Chugger, along with many of the families of the Sparks. The Partons were there too. He saw Kenny trotting behind his parents. Doon raised his arm and called out to Lena, and she came to stand behind him. "Is Ben badly hurt?" Doon whispered. "I think so," Lena whispered back. "The doctor said he has been hit in the shoulder. She says the blast almost blew off his arm." "Listen," said Doon, "I had to tell you something important." And in the next few minutes, as the town leaders and the men carrying Ben mounted to the steps of the stage, he whispered to Lena as he discovered about Tick. "Really?" he said. "Really? How could he? I can't believe it." "And last night," Doon whispered, "I went and found Tick, and I told him I knew, and he said—" But at that moment, Murray Waters held up her hands for quiet. Doon stopped whispering and turned her eyes to the stage. The man had set the stretcher down and propped one end in a chair, so that Ben lay at a slant, a bandage covering one of his eyes. He glared out at the audience with the others. When Mary spoke, there was a slight quaver in her voice. "We are here to talk of a serious matter," she said. "Ben was badly injured yesterday, but he has insisted on coming, and we all wish to speak to you face to face." She paused. "First of all, I must tell you this." Doon's stomach cramped and lurched. "We have realized," Mary said, "that we cannot ask you to leave here. Your generosity yesterday has helped us remember our own." Yes. No one spoke, but the people of Ember glanced at each other and let out breaths of relief. Doon bumped his shoulder against Lena, and they grinned. "Yesterday," Mary went on, "when our weapon exploded and the fire went out of control, the children of Ember crossed the line that divided each of us. We are grateful to her for leading the way." "Lena! Lena!" cried a few scattered voices. Lena thought she heard Maddie's voice among them. Doon, startled by her yelling, "Lena the Brave!" right in the ear. "I want to say," Mary continued, "that we have made mistakes and we are sorry for them. We have good intentions, at least we did at the beginning. We did our best to help you, but when it got hard, we closed our hearts." Wilmer Dent smiled apologetically. "We were worried," he began. Ben interrupted. His voice was hoarse and weak, and he seemed to be having trouble breathing. Dune strained to hear him. "We are justifiably concerned," he croaked, "about critical food shortages, attempting to ensure the safety of our own people." He made a kind of wheezing gasp sound. "Understandably," he added. Wilmer shrugged his shoulders and smiled nervously. "It was just that we were afraid," said Mary. "We were afraid. Let us say it right out. We were afraid that you would ruin everything for us. We were almost on the edge of prosperity. We feared that you would push us back into despair." There was a silence then in which no one knew what to say. "So we tried to get rid of the problem instead of solving it," Mary went on. "Fortunately, both of our plans and yours were not worthy." She stepped forward and gazed out at the crowd. Her eyes met Dune and held them for a second. "Just last night," she said, "I learned two things that should have changed my picture of what has happened here. The first is, we still don't know who wrote the muddy words in the plaza. We may never know. But the other attacks on the people of Ember, the ugly writings on the wall of the Pioneer and the poison oak on the doorsteps were not carried out by Spark villagers at all." I think I know who it is. I think I know who it is. I hope you know too. Whew, that's crazy. I did not expect that. The Emberites turned to each other with puzzled looks and murmured confusedly. But who would? What does that mean? "It was young Dune Harrow who explained it to me," said Mary. "I'd like him to explain it to all of us now, if he will." She nodded to Dune and gestured upwards with her hand. So Dune stood up. He told the assembled people the same thing he told Mary the night before when he came to her house late in the evening. "It can't be true," someone cried out, Dune thought. It was Allie Bright, who had been Tick's right-hand man. "It is true. Tick told me himself last night. He said it was just a good strategy. He said he knew that there was going to be a war and he needed to raise a strong army. When people were attacked, he said, they get mad, and angry people are the best warriors. So he decided to make people angry, and he told me he got a good idea for how to do it when he saw those many words in the plaza." And that a roar swelled up and filled the ballroom. People shouted, "Where is he?" and twisted around to look for Tick. All of them began barging through the audience trying to find him. So if you're a little confused, Dune has said to Mary and then now everyone that Tick was the one to do all these horrible things to make the people of Ember mad. Yikes. Dune called out, "Wait, listen, he isn't here." The commotion quieted down instantly. People turned towards Dune. "Last night when I talked to him, Tick was stuffing everything he owns into a sack," said Dune. "He told me he was leaving. He said he couldn't live here anymore with cowards and traitors. He heard a roamer who was coming through the village today, and he planned to catch a ride with him. Some others were going too. They're going to settlements in the far south," Tick said. "They're where they hope to have a better welcome than they got here." A great clamor greeted this announcement. Some people laughed and some shouted, "Good riddance!" and some just grumbled and shook their heads. Finally, Mary raised her hands and called out again, "Please, quiet, I have more to say." People grew silent again and listened. "I said that I learned two things," she said. "The second is, the incident that set off this chain of violent events did not happen as we thought. It was not Dune Harrow who destroyed those crates of tomatoes." This came as no surprise to the people of Ember, who had never believed Dune guilty of that in the first place. But the villagers at the meeting looked startled. Dune saw Martha Parton flick her eyes up towards him, her eyebrows flying up, and he saw Orderly give him a quizzical look. Behind him, Kenny smiled, a sunny smile. He knew. Torin Kane has taken back the statement he made. He did not, after all, see Dune Harrow throw those tomatoes. He still refuses to say who did throw them. We must make up our own minds about that. But I believe that we can be sure that it was not a person from Ember. At that, a cheer arose from the crowd, a loud, disorderly cheer, and Dune was so astonished that he nearly fell over. Lena grabbed his arm. I made him write it down on paper, she yelled into his ear. I took the paper to Mary last night. When the cheering subsided, Mary continued. We should take note, she said, of how easy it is to bring out the worst in us. The action of those few troubled individuals fanned resentment into violence. Only an accident kept us from murdering each other. She turned around to face Ben, whose head was lolling sideways and his eyes drooping. Ben had something to say now. Ben, are you able? The doctor standing next to Ben nudged his shoulders gently, and Ben opened his eyes. Can you make your statement, Ben? Asked Mary. Ben frowned at the ceiling. The audience waited. Finally he spoke. I had been told, he said, that Dune Harrow, and he stepped, frowned again. I wish to thank a young man named Dune Harrow, he took a shaky breath, for rescuing my foolish nephew. What? Thought Dune. What's he talking about? Ben scowled. He appeared to be gathering his strength. Foolish nephew, Torrin Crane, he rasped, in the pine tree, who would have been killed. Ben's voice sank to whisper, and then the audience. By my foolish actions. Dune stood stunned. Torrin was Ben's nephew? That was a surprise. But it was even more of a surprise to hear Ben almost apologizing for what he'd done. Lena was thumping Dune on the back. Someone behind him cried out, 3 cheers for Dune! And 3 cheers rang out in the ballroom. Dune just stood there, with what he thought was probably a silly smile on his face. Then Mary stepped forward and called for quiet again. Her voice grew steady and businesslike. Now, she said, we must look at our future. You will not get everything you want, neither will we. All of us will suffer, perhaps even be in danger. There'll be more mouths to feed, but more hands to do the work. Although we might have a food shortage, we have no shortage of work, she said. She smiled a little. Her eyes pressed over the people in the room, and Dune felt her gaze almost like a reassuring touch. The main thing, she said. All right, I'm not going to finish this chapter. The main thing, she said, is this. We will refuse to be each other's enemies. We will renounce violence, which is so easy to start, but so hard to control. We will build a place where we can all live in peace. If we hold to that, everything is possible. And that's where I'm stopping. We have just about 2 more pages of this chapter left. And then just 1 chapter left. So I will do a video tomorrow and we'll be finishing this read aloud. Yay. Even though that was very interesting, those few chapters. And we had war. We had Lena save the day along with Dune, which I predicted. So I'm much more excited about the end of this book than the beginning, because very interesting change of events. All right. Oh no. I dropped it. But have a great day. Still miss you.